on January 31st, 2025 at 9:02 a.m. We will attempt to get through this, but we may have to take a recess due to some activities going on next door. First order is to roll call from Dr. Buzzini,
Here.
Dr. Coble,
Here.
Mr. Daniel,
Here.
Dr. Downing,
Here.
Dr. Drake,
Here.
Dr. Kerrigan,
Here.
Mr. Parsons,
Here.
Ms. Zemek.
Here.
Okay, nobody is absent today, so we will move on to item number 2, to review and adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
Hold on, we got a reverb.
Is it that laptop maybe?
It's that laptop, Robert.
Yeah, 'cause it just turned.
The sound needs to be turned. Yeah, I think we can keep going.
Okay, so the next item is review and adopt the minutes from the October 25th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
Or having reviewed the October 25, 2024 meeting.
Excuse me, Mr. Daniel, I'm sorry, I gotta turn your mic on.
Having reviewed the October 25, 2024 quarterly commission meeting minutes, I will make a motion we approve the same.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3 is the office administrative update.
So the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our new commission coordinator, Chelsea Estes, who's sitting right next to Lee. Chelsea has extensive experience managing both budgets and complex organizations in the private sector. We're really happy that she's joining us, and she will be interacting with you quite frequently on things like reimbursements and scheduling and all that sort of stuff. So welcome, Chelsea. We're happy to have you here with us.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. All right.
And then the next thing we want to talk about is the budget. Your 2025 or fiscal year 2025 budget status report is in the meeting materials. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask me. We are in a good position with respect to our LAR, which is that the legislature included the request that OCA made on our behalf in the base budget, so that's going well so far in this next budget cycle, which the legislature is working on as we speak. And everything, you approved the budget last time, so I don't think we need to take any more action on that.
All right. So far, so good.
Lee, do you want to talk about the database?
Yes, I think we're gonna give an update on just populating all the documents in the database. We've been working on getting all of the self-disclosures in there, and the backup documentation to that. We've been working with the laboratories on getting the corrective actions that are associated with each of the self-disclosures up in public view, and we've been through pretty much all of those. And so now we've moved on to the complaints, and we're about halfway through getting the complaints and the supporting documents that were submitted with those up in the database. The other thing we've been working on is getting OSAC registry compliant laboratories to post online that they're in compliance with certain OSAC registry standards. And so we're trying to make an effort to push that. And then the final piece that's not quite populated is the quality incident portal. Some participating laboratories have made an effort to upload stuff there, and then others are working on how they might convert this information and best get it up there. Do you have questions on that?
No, although I would like to say I still have my doubts on how effective that's going to be, and I will keep saying that because it's going to be a redundant process, but
Dr. Barnum, it's a different data. We're talking about two different things.
Oh.
So there's the commission's information that's published online, And then there's the discovery
It is the
portal.
portal I'm talking
Yes.
about. But I
We know.
continue to voice my discontent over it.
Yes.
Those
I
objections.
thought you were retired.
Yeah, my brain is for sure.
And then I also think we were working through the complaints, Robert. We have, Maggie's been populating those as well. Although with the complaints, we have to be careful because sometimes complainants will provide information that is absolutely protected from disclosure as a matter of privacy for, say, a sexual assault victim, or we have complaints involving juveniles, so we have to be really diligent in redactions on all of those, so we treat those under the microscope, but we are working through those as well.
Okay, we'll move to item number 4, which is the complaints and self-disclosures. Mr. Daniel?
Thanks, Dr. Bernard. We have before us today 13 disclosures and 7 complaints, some of which were handled administratively by our staff. So we have quite a bit to go through. But before we start that, I just want to thank our staff as I review these matters. I see how thorough they are. I see that every conceivable question has been posed, and their demand for satisfactory answers is second to none. It just sometimes makes us look better than we are, and we appreciate that. So thank you. And so our first item is item 2426. It's from the Serological Research Institute, their forensic biology DNA section. They had learned from an expert's review of some metadata that certain global file reinjections were programmed into the lab's 3500 instrument, and they weren't being performed at the validated 1.2 kilovolt level. The laboratory did some reinjections at 3 kilovolts rather than the 1.2. To help me understand this, the instrument employs electrical charge during the process of capillary electrophoresis, and it moves the amplified DNA through the capillary where the instrument detects and then analyzes. The analyst can schedule injections at 7, 15, or 30-second intervals. All of the injection times were meant to be injected on the instrument at the 1.2 kilovolt level, and the voltage error occurred exclusively during scheduled re-injections, and always at 7 or 30, not at the 15-second level. So the investigation essentially revealed that analysts had programmed the instrument software to use 3 kilovolt injection instead of the validated 1.2 for the 7 and 30-second re-injections. They attribute that to perhaps human error in the 3 kilovolt setting. I guess the good news is the lab determined that there weren't any defects in the instruments itself or in the global filer kit. The problem was it caused higher injection voltages, which increased DNA peaks and caused background noise. They took a review of the number of cases, and from 2017 through 2022, it impacted about 580 cases. They have reinterpreted all affected cases using the original injections, performed at 1.2, and when a case required correction, it notified the clients or agency. And Ms. Zemak weighed in with some questions. I think she received satisfactory responses back to every inquiry she made. Is that accurate? So I don't know what more they could have done. It's been corrected in light of the root cause review and the case review and corrective action. Staff had brought forth a preliminary recommendation of taking no further action, which I concur with. If there are not any questions or comments or further concerns, I will make that in the form of a motion.
Okay, a motion has been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our second disclosure, item 24.32, comes from the DNA Reference Laboratory, also forensic biology DNA. And it's kind of unusual because the lab had reported some unusual conduct allegations, misconduct allegations against an analyst. The analyst responded to those, and during her responses, as part of her responses, she raised several concerns about the lab's quality system. Staff is currently working with the accrediting body to vet the various issues identified by the analyst. So it really became a matter where staff had recommended that we go ahead and accept this disclosure for investigation and review, and probably need a panel of commission members. So I'll begin with a motion to accept the self-disclosure for investigation by the Forensic Science Commission.
Okay, a motion has been made to accept the self-disclosure for investigation and to create a panel, I take it?
Yes.
All right, the motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Coble, Ms. Zemak, and Mr. Daniel, I believe y'all would make a good panel.
Yes, yes, and yes.
I don't need to take a motion on that.
Might as well.
Yeah, you might as well.
Okay, so,
They would make it great.
yeah, make it,
The power of the chair, he gets to pick all the people, you guys know.
and you wonder why you're on so many panels.
Just a blessing.
All right, so, is there a motion for Dr. Coble, Ms. Zemak, and Mr. Daniel to be on the panel?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our third item. It's item number 24.47 from NMS Labs up in Willett Grove. A little more complicated, but essentially they reported an incident from the seized drug section where an analyst had miscalculated a drug chemistry cannabinoid quantitation measurement uncertainty. It led to an underestimation of the calculated combined certainty. The lab realized they had incorrectly used the root sum squares method to combine uncertainty of measurement in place of the sum of the individual contributors method. They believe this occurred because of inaccurate guidance given to a previous technical team, and frankly, they ultimately determined that the cause was inadequate knowledge and training on the uncertainty of measurement in connection with that instrument. Their technical team is now collaborating with all staff to include including the tox team manager to ensure the uncertainty of measurement is understood and applied correctly. All uncertainty of measurement, budgets, and calculators used within the drug chemistry network had been or are being reviewed and updated by the laboratory. So they identified the problem, they found the root cause issue, and I believe they've actually corrected it. So staff had reviewed it carefully and brought forth a preliminary recommendation of us taking no further action, which I concur with. And if there are not any further comments, questions, or concerns, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion.
Any questions? All right, motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next item. It's 24.48, also from NMS Labs, this time though in Grand Prairie out of their tox section. I will be the first to admit I struggled with this to fully comprehend what we were dealing with, but thanks to my general counsel, she spoke English. But the research and development division had developed an automated method using robotics to prepare samples. Let's finish this up. For testing cocaine and metabolites using LC, MS, and MS, and this, for lack of a better term, failed miserably due to a lack of protein precipitation during the extraction. The method simply didn't perform as had been expected. In a review of the cases, there were 3 that were affected. None of those actually came from Texas. With Dr. Kerrigan's encouragement, I believe they have amended all of their reports to show that. Staff had made a recommendation, I believe, that in light of the case review and the cause analysis and corrective action, no further action was necessary. So if we don't have any further comments or concerns, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion.
Mr. Daniel, I just want to clarify, there were only 2 cases that 3 total, but they were already amending one, and
Right.
we encouraged them to amend the other 2. So it's a very, and none of them are Texas cases, to be clear. It's a very small universe.
which is good.
So you've made a motion for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
What do you do?
We are going to have to take a short break as we have a band playing next door. And hopefully we will be on break no more than 15 minutes. All right, we are back after our brief music interlude. So we're now starting up at 9:32 a.m. on 1/31/2025. Mr. Daniel, item number 6, in which I will recuse myself.
I think it's number 5.
I'm sorry, 5.
Yes, sir, and I think Dr. Drake will preside over this item. It's 2449, it comes out of the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas, their tox section. They had detected back in November a refrigerator with some blood, DWI blood evidence tubes had lost power. They have a system whereby certain personnel are notified, and then somehow, some way, the notification system had lost connectivity following the weekend. The lab has compiled a comprehensive list of cases and forwarded them to the Irving PD that Dr. Bernard informed me they should have already come and got their blood evidence, but they didn't. So the corrective action, they developed a preventive action plan to include the temperature monitoring system for all toxicology refrigerators and freezers, and that's still a work in progress. But it looks like it's not an issue that could have been avoided other than a piece of equipment failed. And it looks like they've done everything to correct it. So staff had brought forth a recommendation preliminarily to take no further action given their corrective actions. And I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion unless there are any questions. If not, I will make that form in the form of a motion, Dr. Drake.
Okay. We have this in the form of a motion for no further action. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
Which will bring us to our next item, which involves another equipment malfunction that comes out of the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office, crime laboratory number 24.50. And also in November, their tox refrigerator number 3 failed. They had 56 cases that reached what they called an unacceptable room temperature. The reason they referred to it as unacceptable is it was stored properly. They didn't feel like the temperature change had caused any degradation due to the sodium fluoride that was included in the specimens. And it was only for 48 hours before they got the matter remedied. There weren't any staff on site on the weekend day when it occurred, and they don't have a automated temperature monitoring system, but maybe they're going to do that. The lab did notify the Tarrant County and also Eastland County prosecutor's offices and also appropriate defense counsel and provided a copy of the notice in each record. They've since repaired the affected equipment. They've installed a backup plug on another piece of equipment and switched both refrigerators to an emergency power circuit in the event of some failure. So they've certainly corrected it, and in light of their action, staff had preliminarily made a recommendation of taking no further action, which I concur with, and I'll go ahead and make that in the form of a motion.
Motion's been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Our next item takes us down to Southeast Texas in the Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab. It's item 24.51. It's an accreditation issue. The lab had discovered it had issued a forensic biology report containing qualitative blood testing results from both accredited and non-accredited activities on the same form or document without making a distinction between the two. The lab is accredited to perform forensic biology screening, but it's actually not accredited to do crime scene. The lab has, since November 22, has changed its forensic biology screening report to make it a little easier to understand and distinguish between eliminating crime scene and introducing a separate, preparing a separate actual crime scene report. It happened because all testing results were still being reported to the customer because the crime scene results were differentiated from a lab testing elsewhere in the case record, and they just simply incorrectly assumed this was sufficient to satisfy accreditation requirements. With regard to case review, they found out that there were crime scene results reported on forensic biology screening in 26 instances. They issued a corrected report with regard to each of those, with the crime scene work being specifically identified as being separate. And for current future crime scene testing, they're going to be in a separate report. And they have notified all law enforcement agencies and the prosecutor's offices with the corrected reports. It looks like they made a mistake. It looks like they corrected it. I don't know what further could be done. So staff had brought forth a recommendation of the commission taking no further action. And if there are not any questions or comments, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion. I will make that in the form of a motion, Dr. Bernard.
All right, motion has been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which will bring us to our 8th item. It's number 24.52. It comes out of DPS breath alcohol lab in Cleburne. And it involves a calibration issue and a training issue also. In late October, the DPS disclosed an incident in its breath alcohol lab identifying some systemic occurrences where one analyst simply did not follow proper breath alcohol instrument calibration procedures. Number one, they didn't follow the procedure, they did not retain all technical records required, and they ultimately issued a calibration certificate without successful completion of a calibration procedure. As they expanded the review, they looked all the way back to 2016 at the analyst's work. They revealed calibration issues were observed that they saw in the initial incident were absolutely systemic and impacted at least 7 other calibration records and 5 additional breath alcohol instruments. As far as root cause, it appeared that analysts had thought that simply starting a new calibration procedure with fresh solutions is required by policy. As management discussed this with the analysts, they indicated that he did not sufficiently understand the actual calibration procedure. The analyst has since resigned after he was removed from calibration work and subsequently has left the lab. The lab has removed all 3 breath alcohol instruments from service and also designated using them as training devices. And all other affected instruments were recalibrated with a current certified technical supervisor. So it looked like a knowledge and training issue that they have addressed adequately. It's been corrected. I'm not sure what further can be done. So staff had brought forth a recommendation that the commission take no further action, which I concur with. If there aren't any questions or comments, I will make that in the form of a motion.
I have a comment real quick. Do we know if this analyst is anywhere else at all in the state of Texas?
He retired. He retired.
Oh, gotcha.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll make a motion that the commission take no further action.
All right, motion's been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that brings us to our 9th matter, Title 24.55. It comes out of the Austin Forensic Science Department. It's another power outage item that's obviously contagious here in Texas. But their seized drug section had a power outage caused by causing the laboratory's gas chromatograph mass spectrometer to shut down and lock, but horribly it also resulted in loss of all the raw data on the instrument. The computer is no longer operational. The case-related data on it is unretrievable. with the loss of data, the analysts will not be able to reprocess or reprint data on a specialized software. They determined it affected, the failure affected 844 assignments. It ultimately determined that it involved 219 cases, 451 items, and 725 samples. So there were 1,578 instrument scans that were essentially lost. They did notify the Travis County DA's office. They did seek to confer with a technology management company, digital forensics company here in Austin about retrieving raw data, but got no viable solution that was found available to retrieve the data. The seized drugs section now backs up its data each month rather than their previous practice of doing so annually. They've also disabled all the lockdown encryption functions on their computers in the lab. So it's a sad situation for loss of data. It looks like the lab has done what they can to prevent it from happening again in the future, or the volume of lost data. And in light of their thorough review, staff had made a recommendation to our commission that we take no further action. I actually concur with that, and I'll make that form of motion unless there are other comments or questions. If not, I'll make that form of motion.
All right, there's a motion for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that brings us to our 10th item. It comes out of the Harris County Institute of Forensic Science, item 25.01. I understand that Drs. Drake and Drs. Kerrigan are going to recuse on this as knowing the analyst personally. Is that correct?
She was a student at Stanford.
Okay. So be it. They reported an incident out of their talk section when analysts had actually modified their proficiency monitoring after it was signed and distributed by the lab's quality manager for talks only. And in her application for renewal license, she saw both disciplines when she's only authorized in talks only. She falsely added seized drugs as a license both in 2022 and in 2024, despite not being proficiency tested in the discipline. The analyst is presently preparing a response to this. We've yet to receive that. Is that correct, Lynn?
We have it now.
Okay.
We did receive it, but we
Had not had time to review it adequately. So staff had appropriately recommended that we go ahead and accept this self-disclosure for investigation by staff, not a panel of commissioners, but by staff, which I think is a good beginning step. And so I will make that in the form of motion that we accept the disclosure and that staff undertake to investigate and possibly report back to us at our April meeting.
All right, motion's been made. Is there a second for investigation by the staff?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that will bring us to our 11th matter. It comes out of the Center for Human Identification in Fort Worth, their forensic paternity testing section. I understand Dr. Cole and Ms. Zemek are going to recuse on this matter. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they had advised the commission back last spring about DNA analysts identified a discrepancy in reported match statistics for an individual case. The lab had processed a child sample where the mother and the alleged father's profiles were sent to DPS. In other words, CHI is doing the child and DPS is doing the two parents. And as the reports were returned, the last pages of the mother and alleged father's profiles were inadvertently switched and resulted in incorrect attribution of 5 loci between the profiles during comparison and statistical calculations. The lab felt like the case's conclusion remained unchanged because the alleged father could not be excluded as the biological father. As far as the cause, the lab believed that insufficient and incorrect labeling of an external agency, electropherograms, contributed to the cause. Only the CHI case number, not the item number, was added to each of the 3 pages of the mother and the quote alleged father being incorrectly added to the 3rd page. staff had attributed a pressure to rush a case status through and competing work priorities as contributing to the error. The lab did a case review with external lab data submissions, determined that this occurs rarely. In the past 5 years, they found 30 total cases with data from external labs received, 18 with multiple case data profiles from external labs. CHI now requests the external labs, provide or create data tables as their preferred format to work with CHI. The lab also provides training on the use of external lab data and has updated Forensic Unit's external data report template to assist in these hybrid cases where more than one lab is involved. It looks like a labeling error, and it looks like they're taking the step to keep that from occurring in the future. And staff had respectfully brought forth a recommendation primarily that we simply take no further action in light of the analysis and corrective actions. And if there are not any questions or concerns, I will make that formal motion. Any questions? So moved.
The motion's been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And our 12th item comes out of NMS Labs that they brought to us last fall, where the laboratory had mistakenly added an analyst to its non-interpretive de minimis license spreadsheet. That was essentially the problem. And for those that you may know or may not know, the commission can grant a de minimis license to a lab that demonstrates its Texas casework is less than 10% of its overall casework during a given year. And then they set about to label their employees as interpretive or non-interpretive analysts. Interpretive analysts must apply as regular licensees through our licensing process. They discovered an employee had been hired as a tox analyst, as a general non-interpretive tox analyst, way back in 2023, did not have the required chemistry credits per our requirements. The lab hired the employee using an external agency, which they attribute to be the cause of the problem, which is outside their standard practice, their usual practice of hiring and vetting an analyst position. As far as corrective actions, the laboratory immediately removed the analyst from Texas casework. The analyst is not performing any casework regarding Texas any longer. They believe the root cause was the lack of process in place to fully evaluate a candidate's eligibility when an external executive search firm was utilized. And it sounds like they're going to address and correct that problem, and it looks like an honest mistake. So staff had brought forth a preliminary recommendation of us taking no further action, and which I concur with and prepared to make the formal motion unless there's any questions. With no questions, I will make that formal motion, Dr. Bernard.
Motion's been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then we now have our very own section of missing evidence, self-disclosures. This one comes out of DPS Austin. Seized drugs. Back last fall, DPS Austin disclosed an incident where the lab found 2 missing FedEx packages. One had seized drugs, the other had a latent print evidence in it. Lab frankly did their very best to obtain information from both customers and also FedEx regarding status location to no avail. The lab's attempts to locate the evidence were not successful. They had the Rangers involved, and they were not able to ascertain much of anything. So it's, again, one of the transit shipping issues, and staff recommend the commission take no further actions. I concur with, and I'll go ahead and make that formal motion.
Motion's been made for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
We which will take us into our complaints. And our first item is item 24.45. It's filed by lawyer Houston Mark Thiessen against an analyst of DPS Houston Toxicology Section. It involved 3 specific criminal cases or trials that involved blood evidence. The complaint was that there was on some previous quality instance, the analyst had failed to reseal evidence. He had another quality incident where 2 times analysts failed to notice swapping defendant information in 2 cases. And the last incident was actually not finalized when this analyst testified. As they prepared for trial, the assistant district attorney had communications with the analyst. And one of them was, any bad facts that we need to know before we encounter those on cross. And the analyst had responded that, well, I have some quality incidents that under my name. I also have others that are being processed that are not final. He should not be aware of those, thus they should not be brought up. So Assistant DA disclosed the one quality incident, not the other. That entered a hung jury, which is not important. The complaint detailed the analyst training since becoming licensed in 2020, that he had been trained on Brady and Michael Morton and our code of professional responsibility, and that he knew he had a duty to disclose, and that his efforts of communication with the prosecutor were an effort to skirt that. The analyst has since responded to this complaint, and he has indicated that he stated his laboratory provided full discovery. He did acknowledge answering questions in a poor manner during the hearing. He claims he did not answer the questions properly, might have misspoken on occasion. And he indicated that he would try to testify better in the future, more accurately. And without going into any further detail, the staff had made a recommendation that we accept this for review by commission members on a panel basis, and it's probably appropriate we do that. The analyst did commit to the fact that he would do a retraining that the commission thought was necessary. So any questions or comments? If not, I'll make that formal motion that we accept the complaint for investigation by a panel of commission members.
All right, motion's been made to form an investigative panel by the commission. Is there a second? Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next motion will be for an investigative panel, which would be Commissioners Parsons, Kerrigan, and Drake. Is there a motion as such?
I'll make the motion.
I feel like that's shady.
We need to get a second on that.
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor of accepting that panel, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Lynn,
And
do we have copies of the examiner's testimony from the trials?
Yes, Robert will get everything.
And that would bring us to our next complaint, which is item 24.46 from Patrick Niles, involved forensic forgery experts and document examination. Niles had alleged handwriting analyst Patricia Hale had issued a false report implicating him in a handwriting case. The copy of the report is in our meeting materials. He complained of some methodology flaws, unsupported conclusions, and lack of adherence to professional standards. Without going into great detail, the staff had brought forth a recommendation to go ahead and just table this and allow them to look at a response from the analyst, which they had requested on December 17th. Do we have a response yet, or still waiting?
We don't have a response, and I'm not sure if we're gonna get one, but the main thing that I wanted to have a little bit more time on is I had asked Robert in evaluating this to take a look at where the OSAC subcommittee on this particular subject stands with standards, and I know there are some that are in the pipeline almost ready to come out, and so I just wanna take a little bit more time to study where the community is, what the issues are that are being raised, and whether there's something that we need to, whether there are further questions that need to be asked.
We could probably have that by our April meeting.
Yes, certainly,
Okay.
for sure.
So, I want to go and make a motion to table this complaint pending response and to provide staff more adequate time to analyze standards in the field.
Okay, motion's been made to table this decision. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then that brings us to item 24.58, our next complaint. It involves Kevin Schute, if I pronounce that correctly, against DPS Tyler regarding seized drugs. He's alleging, or he was convicted actually of possession of THC, and his complaint is that the lab had used a high-performance liquid chromatography to analyze the evidence rather than gas chromatography, that there would have been a different result. He said he bought a THC pen legally in East Texas. He alleges that certain THCA becomes illegal on a Delta non-THC when it's heated via the gas chromatograph. So I think the staff was wanting a little more time and thought it might be best to table this pending review of the information for the lab, by the lab.
So we did have that recommendation, in part because we had sent information to Dr. Kerrigan and Drake to look at it. I mean, this dilemma with THC and products generally purchased in places like gas stations and shops that advertise this stuff, it's an issue, but it's not necessarily a lab issue. It's a issue with the law and the fact that there are a lot of products being sold out there in an environment that is not as tightly regulated as perhaps some other areas. So we are seeing people purchasing things that then they get tested and surprised, you know, what's in there is perhaps not what they realized, but that's more of a legal issue than it is a chemistry issue. We do know of conversion that happens in the process of heating, but I'm not sure that's really the issue here. But I would really more defer to Dr. Kerrigan and Drake about what they think is the most appropriate action with this.
All right, so motions, did you make a motion?
Well, are you recommending we table this to allow Dr. Kerrigan and Drake to review and study it?
I would just ask them.
Yeah, I
Dr.
mean,
Kerrigan, I think, has looked at it, I'm not sure.
yeah, I've looked at it and I don't, had there been in the complaint something to question the original result, I would certainly take it on, but that was not provided. In the absence of an independent test, it appears to be someone who purchased a vape liquid, not understanding that it actually contained a legal substance, and I don't think that's within the commission's purview. So I've reviewed it. I don't have an issue dismissing it, but I haven't heard from Dr. Drake.
Yes, I reviewed it as well, and I agree. I think that it's one of those things where they purchase something and they're not sure of what they actually receive based on the marketing or the packaging. But like Lynn said, I think that's a legal issue.
So if there is an independent test that in fact shows that the original test performed by DPS was invalid, then we could certainly take this issue up again. But that has not been provided.
So we could dismiss it and let the complainant know that. That's one option. I don't know if they did independent testing and just didn't provide it to us, but Robert, you reviewed this and you didn't see evidence of that. No indication of another test result, like it didn't get sent to NMS or anything. So We could let him know that. We would need to see a separate test, and then we could talk to DPS about the discrepant results and see what's going on there. But absent that, I think it's more of a legal issue. And in fact, as we know, it's a priority of the legislature to address this. Peter may be talking to us about that in a bit. How they're gonna do that is unclear at this point, but it is on a lot of folks' radar.
Alright. So is there a motion to dismiss this, notify the complainant, and that if they have further information, they can submit that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries.
And that brings us to our last complaint to be presented to the commission. It's a complaint filed by Lucio Atkinson that said DPS Austin, in his case and others, had engaged in dry labbing. The complaint itself provided almost zero support for that proposition, except his blanket assertion that it's a cover-up. Because it's so minimal, staff had brought forth a recommendation to dismiss the complaint, as it's just too broad-based and not supported by facts and also the case record. If Mr. Atkinson can come back at a later date and provide definitive facts in support of it, we might consider it again. But I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to dismiss item 25.02.
All right, motion's been made to dismiss. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And as the commission members know, the staff has authority to handle certain complaints that come in and actually dismiss the same administratively. There were three of those. One was 2443, one was 2444, and one was 2453. 43 was an anonymous complaint against a Veritaco in Brenham, Texas, that was a digital forensic analyst. There was no supporting documentation. The very allegation, staff dismissed that. Second was 24.44 by Mrs. Bianca Robertson concerning something the Houston PD and fire and ambulance are doing with certain people in the community, but had no facts to support the complaint. And also 24.53 is filed by Rhonda Robertson, alleging an expert performed her competency evaluation was not board certified as required. So staff had dismissed each of those. I think it's better for us to give blessing to their actions, and I would, under one motion, ask to endorse the staff's dismissal of 24.43, 24.44, and 24.53. That's a motion.
Motion's been made. I'll just add a comment that on 4.4, there's no forensic analysis. So it's a different topic altogether.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Sorry, I believe that concludes that item.
All right, next we move to item number 5, the discussion of the Crime Laboratory Accreditation Program.
This quarter, the commission is considering 5 total accreditation matters. 4 of those that you'll see in your materials are surveillance document reviews and continuations of accreditation by the corresponding accrediting body. And one of them, a laboratory went through a full reassessment and renewal of its accreditation. There are 2 items on this memorandum that we'll be carrying over into the next meeting because staff and or other commissioners are helping us work through some of the issues that were cited as nonconformities at each of the audits. And that one is quality forensic toxicology, and the other one is forensic analytical. You'll see that those have numerous nonconformities, and just due to the volume and nature of the nonconformities cited, we're working with the accreditation managers in those contexts to see how they were resolved and followed up on. Does anyone have any questions on the accreditation memorandum? Secondly, here we summarize our proficiency testing non-consensus reports. We had 23 to consider this quarter. Most of them did not require any follow-up. We had 2 that were reviewed by Commissioners Zemek and Coble, and once we posed the questions and got additional information, we had no further follow-up on those, and they were forensic biology related, of course. We had 1 by NMS P2414 that was carried over from last time, and Dr. Kerrigan had some questions for the laboratory on that, but I believe that they were sufficiently answered this quarter, so we can move on from that item as well, and I don't think we have any that carry over, thanks to our commissioners who helped us review these 23 non-conformities. Does anyone have questions about anything we've summarized there?
Dr. Kerrigan, were all your questions answered?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, then we move to item number 6, which is the updates on the licensing advisory committee.
So the licensing committee, as you guys know, met yesterday at 10 o'clock here in the same room. To give you just a brief rundown of how many total licensees we have 1,315 total licensees. Last fall, we made it through hopefully our last really heavy renewal cycle, and thanks to the licensing staff and the cooperation of all the laboratories and individual licensees, we successfully transitioned everyone through their renewals. And so you'll see those staggered birth date expirations now, and anyone that applies as a new applicant, they'll just have a regular 2-year renewal term going forward. Yesterday, I'm trying to think what else we kind of updated them on. We did talk about transitioning. We're still working on transitioning from the top class LMS software over to an application software program that we refer to as ALIS, is an acronym, ALIS. And we expect to have that transition complete probably this summer. So we're working with a program manager at OCA that's helping us keep us on track, getting us transitioned through that. Some of the key things, item B here, that we made decisions on or reported on yesterday at the licensing advisory committee meeting, we did address creating a licensing program for rapid DNA operators in the state. I think we'll talk about that in much more detail later on, but a recommendation came from the licensing advisory committee that the commission should direct staff to propose rules that create a rapid DNA operator program. Members also discussed incorporating current QAS requirements. The QAS recently issued a draft that hasn't quite been adopted yet, as some of you probably know, and it will be effective, I believe, July 1, 2025. And so the committee wants us to think about incorporating those requirements for forensic biology DNA analysts into our rules. Because right now we require the 2011 version, and there's been some different iterations of it since we adopted our rules. So you'll see those rules probably proposed after our July meeting once those new QAS requirements are effective. And just to give you guys a little bit of a summary on how that came up, we've been getting a lot of new applications, right? And so we're doing several different coursework reviews that you'll see here that we'll go through next. And we had 3 different forensic biology applicants that you might think should probably qualify, but they're missing one of those components of ours from that QAS. And so it's really difficult for the committee to come to an agreement on whether or not we should approve the candidate's coursework. But when we strictly look at that 2011 version of the QAS, it's clear that they don't quite meet the requirements. I believe the next iteration of the QAS is going to open up some of that coursework requirement or make it more clear so that perhaps the 2 candidates that we might deny today would actually qualify without having to take like another molecular biology course. Molecular biology seems to be one that a lot of folks are missing, even from like forensic master's programs, is what Megan was telling us. So it's unfortunate that these programs don't, make it clear that you need this for licensure. So I think that's it on the summary front. Did you have anything else, Lynn?
Yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about the Herculean efforts that our friends from, Shelley Rossi, who's here, Paul from Plano PD, they've been working very hard with TDII to introduce the voluntary license in the disciplines that TDII has membership for. So we're talking about Friction Ridge and crime scene. They're doing a whole curriculum for the June meeting. I believe it's in League City, is that right? Where Shelley's gonna go through, this is what licensing is about, this is how you get licensed. I mean, it's a real effort on their part, and Michelle's been working on for forensic science service providers, mainly law enforcement agencies that do some forensic science work but that aren't accredited. What does it mean to do proficiency monitoring, and what does an inter-lab proficiency test look like, or an intra-lab, and what will the commission be looking for if they ask some of those activities to qualify for licensure. So they've been doing a tremendous amount of work, and that's in addition to everything that Shelley has done to get that law enforcement statistics course going. So I just wanted to really recognize their efforts publicly, along with other members of TDII who've been working real hard on this. So we talked about that for a little bit, and I think that was the other thing that I wanted to hit on.
Okay, I think moving on to C here, we reviewed yesterday, and just to remind you guys of the law, the committee makes a recommendation to the commission on whether or not we approve or deny someone's application, right, or their coursework, for example. And so that's why we're bringing you all these final votes and recommendations from the licensing committee. Yesterday, we reviewed 4 candidates' coursework review requests, and 3 of those were forensic biology applicants that were missing 1 or more courses that weren't clearly indicated on the transcript. We ultimately denied 2 of those forensic biology ones. One of them, candidate 4, clearly had the molecular biology and a molecular genetics course that they had. And then the final one was a statistics course that we approved. So we're asking you all today to adopt the recommendation from the committee to deny candidate 1 and 3 their requests, and to approve candidates 2 and 4.
All right, is there a motion to adopt the coursework recommendation and the determination by the licensing committee?
So moved.
Advisory committee. So moved. Yeah, second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Before we talk about the rule change involving the T-code, my thing keeps fading in and out. I'm just gonna have it right here. Okay, so one thing I wanted to talk to you about that's been an ongoing theme with licensing advisory committee is about the availability of firearms examiners for defense. And one of the things that we were trying to do, because, an option is to remove the accreditation requirement for firearms examiners, but that does not seem to be an option that appeals to either the licensing advisory committee or the commission. So we've been trying to figure out, there it is again, waiting. What are the other options? So if you follow the grant making process in the forensic space, there is a lot of support for publicly funded small labs that are trying to achieve accreditation. So like county labs or city labs. What we weren't able to find was grant support for private entities that maybe they were in an accredited lab and they come out and they want to start their own firm. So we talked to ANAV to see what they thought and whether they were aware of any sources of funding for that purpose. And what they said is, well, why doesn't a public defender's office or a MAC or something set up a firearms lab, and then they can help offset the cost for that, and then that lab can be accredited? Because I guess that's a model that works in other states. So the next step that I was going to take was to talk to the Ancient Defense Commission Executive Director, Scott Ehlers, and see whether or not there's any appetite for setting up a defense or defense available qualified, accredited firearms examiner as an appendage of one of those publicly funded agencies, because then they would be eligible for those grant opportunities. So we're gonna work on that next.
And you mentioned, you said a public defender's office or a MAC. You say MAC, what is that?
It's the managed assigned counsel programs. I don't know that that would be the right place to put something like that, because I think it's a little bit more folks who are in private practice, but who take cases through the MAC, so probably an actual established public defender's office would be the better option, but I don't know if they've considered that ever. You know, setting up a firearms laboratory is less capital intensive than, say, setting up a DNA lab or, you know, toxicology or drug chemistry. So firearms feels like a better fit for something like that. I'm just not sure if they have thought through that ever and whether it would be a viable option or not. But it is better than creating this two-tiered system of defense experts who aren't accredited and states experts who are accredited. You know, because then I think it plays itself out in a way that perhaps unfairly makes it seem like these experts aren't as good and these experts are better. So we want to explore all the avenues before we talk about rule changes.
I will agree that it's not as expensive as a DNA lab, but it's not innocuous. I mean, it does cost a good bit, and then all the things that go with it.
Right, and I think for individuals who may have a small private lab or consulting lab, our understanding is their position with firearms is that, unlike in other disciplines where they could take a look at the data and really provide a good, solid opinion to the defense lawyer, in firearms, they really need to take possession and take a look at it under the microscope, physical possession of the evidence. And once that happens, the accreditation requirements certainly kick in. And those folks are running very small operations where the cost of accreditation may feel prohibitive, but if you were to have that as part of a public entity, they could absorb some of that. And I mean, it's definitely not innocuous, and it's, especially as newer technologies come online like 3D microscopy and so forth, where those are quite expensive instruments. But it's something that we wanted to explore, and since TIDC is our sister agency within OCA, it makes sense to talk to them about.
All right, any further discussion on that? All right, I think we still have D go.
Item D here, the licensing advisory committee yesterday recommended that you all propose this rulemaking. If you all recall, our voluntary licenses for crime scene in all of the different categories require them to take the TCOL course number 2106 crime scene search course. There are different versions and iterations of that course. Our rules only count one taken revised 2019 or later. And the problem with that is we have applicants that took it before that. That's where this issue came up. So we're proposing to revise the rule to encompass those folks as long as it was taught by a TCOL certified instructor or an approved, TCOL approved subject matter expert.
All right, is there a motion to propose changes to the rules discussed, subject to suggested non-substandard revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. The two avenues for approval are that you're a TCOL certified instructor, or that the commission approves you as a subject matter expert, even if TCOL has not certified you. Because what we understood from speaking with the Texas Rangers in particular yesterday is that, number one, TCOL certification does not guarantee subject matter expertise, and number two, there are some really skilled subject matter teachers who may not have the TCOL certification. But we just want to make sure that if you don't have that certification, we're taking a look at your CV and that we understand that you have the experience and expertise to teach the course. So it's trying to cover both of those.
Okay, is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Is there, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Item number 7, discuss and vote on the rule changes on inactive license status.
All right, this is a rule adoption from a proposal we made at the last meeting. And this defines our inactive license category. And inactive, just to be clear, is not a disciplinary action. It's not a disciplinary status at all. And we're gonna make that really clear on the website too, in a chart that explains the different statuses that Lynn and I are working on. But inactive just means you're no longer working for a laboratory or you're working in a different role. And so we have to make your license inactive just because pursuant to the Texas Administrative Code, you have to be working for an accredited lab for us to give you a license. And so the purpose of this rule is just to make that clear that what inactive means and that it's not a disciplinary type status.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt changes to the rules discussed, subject to suggested non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 8.
So you may recall that we had asked the Austin Forensic Science Department to do some internal review work with respect to their firearms unit, in particular the documentation of training and also just sort of a general review to make sure that everyone could have confidence in the work, and not only the work but also the documentation of the work that was coming out of that unit based on a sort of disclosure that we got that involved a bit of a whistleblower scenario from a former firearms examiner. And they have gone through that process and retained Jim Carroll, who's a very well-known firearms expert and very much involved in OSAC and other initiatives. He is the director of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Crime Lab. So we just wanted to invite Dr. Dana Kadavi to share with us a little bit about their experience and what the results of that review were, because I think you all will find it interesting, and I think she presented to the TACLID yesterday, and I think they're gonna do even more follow-up work so that other labs can benefit from the things that Jim Carroll suggested. So I hate to do this to you, Dana, but in order to pick up the audio, we have to have you stand up there.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, this podium is made for a giant. Hey, I'm Dr. Dana Kadavi. I'm the director of the Austin Forensic Science Department. And as Lynn mentioned, we contracted Forensic Firearms ID to perform a detailed independent review of our basically our training program, our training documentation, and sort of complementary case review records for our firearms unit. And so this included examining training records for 3 firearms examiners in the unit, as well as 34 detailed case records, mostly focused on more complex comparison cases, because those are the most interesting and hopefully would give us more information. And we did have one examiner who wasn't signed off for that, so that they did some other case review assignments for that examiner. And we did use Jim Carroll, and it was a very positive experience for us. In addition to Jim just being a wealth of subject matter expertise and being on the OSAC, he has a magical ability to interact with the examiners, supervisors, technical leaders, managers, and really just get in there and disarm people and just really be collaborative about the process. So we really appreciated working with him. And the good news overall is that that review really validated that our firearms examiners are well trained, and that was, evident by the training program and records and documentation that are reviewed, but also really by evidence of their competency, performance, and their performance on the casework that he reviewed in supplement to the training records. So that made us feel good. And it also validated that our verification process, which is 100% verification of every case that comes through, is thorough and effective at preventing us from releasing a report that might not have the best information in it, so we felt good about that. But as we all know, anytime you have a critical evaluator come in and look at your systems, you want them to find stuff because we want to get better. And so really not huge surprise to us on the training front, but really the most common denominator of the items that he found for continuous improvement were really surrounding our documentation. So that's documentation in case records, details, and documentation of our training records. And so we had, he highlighted several areas for improvement. And luckily, because we have a stellar QA group, they had already identified some of these issues with the training records. We had things, you know, firearms train over the course of 3 years. We have stuff in various forms, in various locations. It wasn't easy to put it all in one place and easy for somebody else who's a layperson perhaps, or even sometimes a fire examiner to really review it and get a good understanding. So it really helped us tighten up that system to take a hard look at that. And we've since been able to control a checklist that's being used. We were using checklists before, but they weren't controlled documents. And those checklists really detailed every step along the way, not only using the terminology and the exercises and the practicals required by AFTI, but also put that in layman's terms so that a new trainee or maybe an assessor whose experience is not in firearms can really understand what that person is learning at every step of the process in a variety of different ways. We also included some new checks and balances, so there's more contemporaneous scanning and signing off of each individual section in real time, and then that is further verified by the quality assurance program and manager. And what's really cool, and we really piloted this with our crime scene group because it's much larger and we put through people, many more people through training on a regular basis, is they have taken the training programs and incorporated them into Ideagen, which is formerly Qualtrics, the document management system for QA, and that really just streamlines everything, makes it kind of foolproof for everyone, and really easy to pull everything together at a drop of a hat. So that was great, and it was nice to have Jim look at that and see, are those things we put in place effective, do you think? And overall, I think he was very pleased with what we had done there. And he gave us some really good recommendations in terms of documentation of the case record. So he agreed that all of our conclusions were well-founded and well-supported. But again, you know, when we switched to all digital, I think, and using LIMS and photography, we really did a lot more photography than a lot of other labs might have been doing in their case records, which is good. But we needed to supplement that with more contextual text information in the LIMS matrix panels. So for example, really documenting each pairwise comparison as you were doing it, as opposed to summarizing it at the end. So really somebody could repeat that in a step-by-step fashion and making it really easier for a person to come in and say, oh, okay, I see exactly the order you did everything. So incorporating a little bit more detail there. Another example is just being a little bit more detailed in the text explanations for all of your bases of your conclusions all throughout the way. So really what that meant was modifying our LIMS matrix panels to include drop-down menus, prompts, additional space, just space for them to enter the information. Really, it was a system improvement to help guide them through the way and provide them the mechanism to actually capture that information. And then another recommendation was really annotating all that photography that we put in. Photography is great, but you don't always have the firearms examiner there telling you, this is the area of focus from which I base my conclusion. And that is just very helpful for the courts or any of our customers. So I thought those were sort of the highlights of the things that we are continuing to improve upon. We were able to incorporate all of his recommendations. There might be one that was beyond our IT administrator to fixing in the limbs, so we're having our vendor do that, but we've incorporated all the changes. I think a really secondary benefit is because he's a participant in this OSAC, we're really set now for the next set of standards that are coming out. So I think it's putting us a little bit ahead of the game there, making us feel super confident about what we have in place now. And that lays a really good foundation for the virtual microscopy work that we're doing validation plans on currently. So it was a very good experience. Highly recommend Jim. He was wonderful, and thanks for the recommendation. Actually, I think worked out well for us.
Thank you, Dana. I wanted to point out that in a number of the Commission's recent reports that we've written, particularly the Friction Ridge one, it's an older case, but one of the things we talked about was the connection between the photographs and the decision-making along the way. So photographs are great, but if you look at them 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road, is there enough information in the case file to understand what's going on in that photo? Or is it only the people who were working within that SOP at the time who can tell you? Well, that's not particularly helpful, especially for the lawyers or any subject matter experts they might bring in to take a look at it. So what I particularly love about this and why I wanted you to share it is because it is a direct response to some of the things we've been saying in other disciplines, either, pattern matching disciplines where similar issues are there. The more information there is, the better it is for transparency, for people to be able to, was this a hard comparison? Was it a straightforward, easy comparison? A lot of what it is that you're integrating will help point to that, and hopefully the lawyering will get better in part because there's more information in these case records. So that was one thing that I wanted to point out. And the second is a question around the 3D microscopy validation. Do you know, and I can ask the firearms working group, the people who are validating 3D microscopy in the state, or the labs that are they talking to each other about the 3D microscopy validation, or not really because they're using different scopes, or how's that?
Many of us are using different scopes. Unfortunately, I was really hoping that Austin, Houston, and Texas DPS would all be using the same scope, but of course, as procurement works out, that didn't happen. That said, we are trying to do and polling all the validation plans, anything or if other laboratories have already performed validation, and bringing them all together so that we can see how everybody's doing it. And we're just in the beginning validation stage, planning stage, so my hope would be, and I think they've already kind of agreed to do it, that my partners at HFSC and Texas DPS will look at our validation plan and make sure that we're kind of singing the same sheet of music. And
the other thing that I would encourage, and I can talk to the firearms working group about this because there's representation from all three labs there, but NIST was planning a validation workshop that was supposed to happen in early March. That has now been sort of postponed or frozen pending, how things are gonna work out at the federal level for some of these initiatives. But at some point, I'm sure it'll be back on, and that will be very instructive. In the meantime, we have in the firearms working group, Steve Lund from NIST, working side by side on all these issues, and I would really strongly encourage folks, if you're all on listening, or if you're not, the lab directors bring this back to them, and I'll tell them too, use Steve's expertise to review those validation plans. He's sitting right there, like he can help us. And NIST is really eager to help in a practical level, us especially in Texas, where there's a lot of coordination and people are talking to each other. So he's a great resource. And he has the resources of all of this behind him. And I know Mike, who used to be at this, can speak to that, but I mean, he's great. So I know you don't all have the same scopes, and it is unfortunate, it's a function of procurement, I get it. But we do have resources that we've brought in on this, and let's use them.
Okay, thank you. I totally agree. This is just gonna make it so much easier for firearms examiners to prep for court and then for our customers to review all the information, so. It's been very good, thank
You know,
you.
I'm still very sad that Plano didn't get its scope. It is very sad. I just need to say that out loud. Because they deserve the scope. They deserved it.
That's a sad face for me, I'm sorry. Well, just come on over, we're hiring. Is that inappropriate? Are there any questions before I?
So we'll say it's remarkable the change in the past few decades in terms of where it was and where it is now in terms of firearms examination. Where in the past, there was this argument of why you shouldn't even take photographs. So it's a gigantic change from where it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 9. It's the final investigative report.
Robert has some slides, so he'll go through it. It won't take long. It's a pretty straightforward report.
All right, this is disclosure, the Texas DPS Wesselco seized drug section.
Robert, the mic's not picking you up.
It involves a large volume of seized drugs, and as you know, sometimes it's not feasible to test every item in large submissions. So laboratories use a sampling plan. DPS uses a random number generator. What happened there? I don't know what happened. It died.
Whole laptop just died.
Are you serious?
I'm pretty sure you can just follow along. It's not complicated.
Hold on a second. Let's just let the folks know online what's happening. So, the laptop that Robert is presenting from, has died.
We've got a password.
So we are trying to get the slide deck going again.
Do you have a password? Right.
I think we're gonna take a 5-minute technology break. We'll be back at 10:44.
And looks like the computer is now working.
So, as I was saying, DPS uses a random number generator program where you input the total number of exhibits and the number of items that you want to test, and it will randomly select which of those items you test. So in this case, if the total number of items was 400 vape pens, they set it up to test 5 of those and then put those numbers in the random number generator, and it selected the 5 units that they were supposed to test. DPS has this policy, and part of their policy is that random number generator form has to be maintained in the case file. What happened in this case is the analyst apparently did all that correctly, but then lost somehow or misplaced the original random number generator form. And rather than telling somebody that's what happened, he just fabricated and like manually manipulated the first 5 numbers on that form to coincide with what he'd already tested, and just submitted that for technical review as if it was the original. The technical reviewer caught it because there was a mistake on that form. It listed 275 units instead of 400 because the next exhibit was 275 units. So the analyst told the technical reviewer that he had generated that form to replace the lost or misplaced form and go to the next one. And the technical reviewer advised him that he'd have to redo that form and then retest whatever 5 exhibits came up. After that conversation, he again approached the technical reviewer with a form that had the correct number in it, and which was 400, and he claimed that this was the original form, that he had found it on his laptop. The laboratory is simply unable to confirm whether that's true or not true. I've got a couple of little exhibits here. This is the form that he initially submitted for technical review, and if you squint, you can see the total number of units there. It shows 275, and you'll see next to it a 400 question mark. That's the technical reviewer's notes pointing out the mistake. And if you go to the next one, this is what he came back with, saying, I found it. This is what he represented to be the original form, but we just can't say whether it is or not. So this report goes through that and makes a misconduct finding against the analysts because he fabricated a case document to replace a lost document. He intentionally manipulated entries on that form and presented it as the original form. And that's a deviation from the standard of care ordinary analysts would utilize. Also violated several provisions of the Code of Professional Responsibility, the one about maintaining accurate records. It's one thing to lose something, that's something that can happen, but it's quite a different thing when you fabricate a document. Failed to notify management of the adverse event of the loss of that document, and then failed to present accurate, complete data based on good scientific principles and validated methods. The recommendation for disciplinary action against his license, he's currently inactive because he resigned his position. He's not within a lab right now. His license expires in June, so the disciplinary action is just to suspend his license until it expires, and then have a 2-year ban on any attempts to renew or reinstate his license until June of 2027.
I just wanted to recognize that Texas DPS in Weslaco was very cooperative and forthcoming when we spoke with them, and they also obviously pay attention to detail because they caught the issue. And one of the things that happened, at first they saw that the form had 275 as the total number of units, and so the thought process initially was, oh, you're gonna have to redo this with 400 because the random number generator had the wrong number inputted. But then what they realized when they looked at it a second time was, oh, wait a minute, one of these numbers is 350 something. So there's no way that the random number generator would have come up with that number if it only had 275 as the total number of units inputted. So that's when they realized, wait a minute, there's something really wrong here. It's not just an initial forgetting, but the form doesn't make sense on its face. And so they were very diligent and they caught it and they addressed it and they raised it up the chain, you know, of command as it needed to be, or the management structure, I should say. And DPS came forward to us and let us know what was happening. So I think the folks in Weslaco, we talked at length, and one of the things that we wanted to emphasize in the report is that, you know, the quality assurance programs are there for a number of reasons, but one of them is for transparency, so people understand when things are not what the lab expected, you know, what is the nature of the nonconformity and all of that. I think it's normal for people to not want to make mistakes. You know, humans don't want to make mistakes, but what we need to keep encouraging folks is that making a mistake and saying, I lost the form, I dropped the swabs on the floor, whatever, fill in anything in the blank. Those things can be resolved. What can't be resolved is fabricating a form and a case record, which is the official government record of Texas DPS. Once that step has been taken, it is very hard to walk back from that. So we just want to keep emphasizing, like, mistakes are okay, we know they're uncomfortable, we're in an adversarial system. That is part of one of the biggest challenges, I think, and stressors in forensic science is the adversarial nature of the system within which forensic laboratories operate. At the same time, we can resolve mistakes. Covering up mistakes is almost impossible to come back. So that was the message there. I would say for all the quality managers and the TAFCM folks listening, there are no recommendations in this because it was perceived as an isolated incident. There are neither general recommendations nor accreditation assessment recommendations.
All right, any further discussion or questions? All right, is there a motion to adopt the draft of the investigative report subject to non-substantive revisions by staff?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 10.
So we have gathered the statewide firearms working group, which has met in person. It was a really great and productive meeting. They started out with the recommendations from the Nana Williams report, in particular the ones that ANAP and A2LA will be assessing to work their way through the first one, and we'll ask for a vote on that shortly about the definition of consultation. They're working through the second one, which pertains to blind verification policies, and if you recall, the commission has been saying for a number of years that laboratories need to have policies around blind verification. That doesn't mean they need to do 100% or even 50% or even 10% or any specific percent of blind verification, but they need to do some and they need to articulate that policy. And what was interesting in the conversation is we see that the policy on blind verification ranges from 100% at SWIFT's, 100% blind verification they do, all the way down to labs that are just now sort of thinking through how they're going to implement it. But everyone in that group is engaged and willing to help each other, and it's just a really great group. They also heard a presentation from Henry Swafford and Steve Lund at NIST about the method performance data that they're suggesting be gathered and appended to reports in the future. That's a long-term project that a subcommittee within that working group is kicking off here shortly. And then we also talked about the blind quality control program that is such it's regarded nationally, internationally, as such an important initiative that Houston has done. published. The publications that have come out of it are super helpful. And a lot of labs would like to be able to do something similar. HCIFS has a program, but outside of HFSC and HCIFS, who have run these programs over time and published on them, for a lot of other labs, it feels really daunting because it's not a small thing to start. DPS has started. Austin, I think, has started to some degree or is talking about doing something. So some of the labs are working through pilots of these, but, trying to make it a more widespread initiative in forensic labs requires some brainstorming and some resources to be brought to bear. So we're talking through that as well. And there'll be a presentation on how HCIFS and HFSC approach this at the next in-person meeting of that group. They meet twice a year. We first met in Austin. The second meeting will probably be either in the Metroplex or in Houston. So the group is really great and they're super interested in working well together. And as I mentioned before to Dana and to the group, we have the full investment of NIST, the full support to help with this initiative, so that's been great. The one thing that we do need to do, if you recall the commission's report, and Nathan Williams said that all the laboratories in Texas that do firearms work needed to have a policy on documenting consultation. Now, there's nothing earth-shattering about that because that's an accreditation requirement. But what we realized and what ANAP pointed out to us, in fact, when we were talking through this, is that there isn't really a uniform definition of what is a consultation. And so the firearms group came up with a definition that they agreed to unanimously after some conversation among a few of the examiners. And what they came up with was that consultation is a discussion between the primary examiner and another qualified examiner for the purposes of providing guidance, opinions, or advice to the primary examiner to aid in their evaluation of suitability or source conclusion. This definition pertains to discussions that occur before a conclusion is reached by the primary examiner, deliberations that occur after a conclusion is reached by the primary examiner will be handled under the laboratory's verification or conflict resolution policies as applicable. I see Mark. So this definition is in your Govenda. You should be able to see it there. And this was, number one, it is consistent with the OSAC definition. So that was important to us for those who are OSAC implementers, which is everybody, soon to be everybody. We talked about that yesterday at the TACLID. Everyone felt comfortable with this definition, and it clearly distinguishes, like, at what point do we switch to the conflict resolution policy, which all accredited labs also have to have documentation on conflict resolution. That, I think, was easier for labs to understand. If you have people disagreeing, of course, that needs to be documented in the record. So what we are hoping for is if we have agreement on the commission that we could get a vote to approve this, and then we will forward it along to ANAP because they'll be assessing to this definition. And the checklist requirement, just to reiterate for folks in the audience, is that everyone has to have a policy for documentation of consultations, and the definition of consultation is the one I just read that the firearms group came up with. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the definition of consultation as we just heard it, developed by the working group and direct staff to provide definition to ANAP? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now, for item number 11.
Okay, so for item number 11, what we're talking about is the FBI has decided and announced in a webinar / infomercial for anybody who watched it last week, that for rapid DNA technology, which is something that we've been talking about here at the commission for a while now, the FBI has arrived at the point where they feel, and they're issuing rules starting in July when they do the QAS revision, they are going to allow the results from rapid DNA instruments to be entered into CODIS to see if there is a hit that comes back from CODIS. It used to be that the FBI said, if you use one of these instruments, that's fine, but we're not giving you access to CODIS unless you're in an accredited lab. Now they're saying that law enforcement in particular can have these instruments and access CODIS if, and only if, those law enforcement agencies have partnerships with accredited labs that have access to CODIS. And the way it will work, although I think ANAB's still figuring it out as we are, and as Texas and the rest of the states is trying to figure it out, those law enforcement agency activities will be incorporated within the umbrella of the laboratory's quality system. So that is a pretty big step for the labs to take, to essentially take ownership and responsibility for those rapid DNA instruments that will be housed within law enforcement. But I think the thing that, if you stuck with the webinar long enough, there was an interview between Dr. Badoli and Doug Harris from the FBI, Dr. Harris. And they talked about, how the FBI got here and what got them to this level of confidence. And a key component is that partnership, the relationship with the accredited lab. So, we have our own experiences in Texas with rapid DNA. We've talked about it. Houston and Plano in particular have their own experiences. But this is moving forward, and there will be a lot of, in part because it does help make the investigation faster, because the technology does produce helpful information. Particularly with respect to property crimes, the numbers are quite staggering in terms of how much it helps having this technology brought on board. Now, we have forensic science service providers, labs in Texas that have the rapid instruments in-house. I think the CHI has at least one. I don't know, Houston has one. I think Harris County has one, or no, okay. The instruments are out there and they are functioning, and they can be helpful. And this is moving forward. Now that the FBI has given the green light on CODIS, it's definitely going to be moving forward. And I should say that there was a pilot allowing evidentiary items to be run through those rapid instruments that Texas DPS participated in over the last few years that in part informed the FBI's decision. So what we're talking about is crime scene samples going into the rapid instrument, and under the accreditation umbrella of the partner lab, those results will be reported out. That's what's gonna start happening. Now, Dr. Coble or Ms. Zemek, if I got any of that wrong, please let me know, but that's what I understand from the webinar. The FBI suggested that every state develop a working group to start talking through how this is gonna go. And so we, understanding what the law in Texas is, if you perform an expert examination or test on physical evidence, including DNA evidence, for the purpose of connecting it to a criminal action, that must be done within an accreditation umbrella. If you perform forensic analysis on behalf of a court or crime laboratory, you must be licensed. So in Texas, the idea is, at least preliminarily, that there needs to be explored, and what the LAC recommended yesterday is the exploration of a license specifically designed for rapid DNA operators. Because those folks are gonna be within the accreditation umbrella of the labs anyway, so that's for everything. That's from chain of custody all the way through non-conformities to the extent they may occur. So I think the idea is that it would be a special program just for them. We're not quite sure who's going to be running these evidentiary samples through the rapid instrument. I do think the Rangers will play a big part in it, though I'm not sure that it will actually be Texas Rangers doing it, but rather it may be actual Rangers, it may, or members of the Ranger Corps, it may be people that they hire for that purpose, we're not quite sure yet. And then some of the other law enforcement agencies that have accreditation for other disciplines, such as Montgomery County Sheriff or Plano PD or some of the others, Harris County Sheriff, they are at least already within a management system that is an ISO accredited system. So some of those places would be logical partners for this sort of thing. The way it's gonna work accreditation wise, because I was just at ANAP last week, is the rapid DNA testing is a separate discipline's not the right word, it's a separate entry on the accreditation. So for example, if you are a 17020 lab and right now you're doing, say, crime scene in Friction Ridge, you can add just rapid DNA to your scope, even though you don't otherwise have forensic biology. That's the way it's gonna work. And you can get accredited by ANAB if you meet their accreditation requirements. Now, if you do that without partnering with the CODIS lab, you don't have access to CODIS, and so all you can do is create a small pond database, which seems, at least in Texas, to not be the direction that folks are headed. I mean, the reason why people wanna do this is so they can have access to CODIS, that's the whole point. In other states, they do it differently, but my guess is here, most law enforcement agencies will understand the benefits of CODIS and not invest if they can't access CODIS because those small pond databases are so limited. So that's where we are with rapid DNA. And the recommendation that came out of the licensing advisory committee meeting yesterday was all around establishing this working group per the recommendation of the FBI. And we sort of brainstormed who might be on such a group, and we came up with the following list of participants. And it's a lot of letters. So TACLID, anybody pause me if you don't know who I'm talking about. TACLID, TAFQAM, TCDLA, Texas Association of Forensic Quality Managers. TCDLA, TDCAA, the Licensing Advisory Committee, so LAC, ANAB, A2LA, the Texas Rangers, the Texas Police Chiefs Association, and the Sheriff's Association of Texas. So the idea here is to get that group together and to start planning how this is all gonna go.
The scope of work for this working group extends beyond just the licensing component, correct? It extends to the overall program, what it would look like, for example, this partnership between
Right.
law enforcement and laboratories.
Right, and that's why ANAB and A2LA are part of it, is to talk through all those issues. So it would be recommending criteria for a rapid DNA operator license and working in conjunction with law enforcement and the accrediting bodies about what that partnership is gonna look like. Cause I don't even think that ANAB is entirely 100% understanding what that's gonna look like yet, and they're the accrediting body. So they're still, I mean, they're working through it just as we are. And I can tell you that, you know, the feedback I got last week at the assessors meeting is that some of the things they think are relatively straightforward, actually, like, you know, documenting nonconformities, but the question around chain of custody is a big one. You know, where's the stuff gonna be housed? Who's responsible for it? Whose quality system is responsible for that? How the chain is gonna be documented, all those things are fairly significant questions.
I'm looking at the guide to all things rapid DNA.
I can't hear you, Jarvis, I'm
I
sorry.
don't know if this works.
It works, you just gotta get it close to you.
I did. There we go.
It's off.
It's awful.
There you
All
There
right.
you go.
I'm looking at the guide to rapid DNA in the booking station. And so, look, do we need to get the Texas jail administrators in on this? Because that's who's going to be dealing. They're gonna be overseeing that part of the procedures and looking and taking those samples.
I would sort of punt that a little bit to tackle it, because I'm thinking through, so the booking station swabbing is a little bit different because they're taking knowns from people who are in custody. What I'm talking about is crime scene samples coming in from a scene into these instruments. I'm not sure about the booking station part. What do you think, Peter? Any thoughts, or anybody else? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and Brady's not here, but I mean, DPS, so Darren Molina and Brady have been pretty heavily involved with the booking station side of things. And there's a lot more framework around that. So I would tend to think not, it's really more of a DPS thing and an Estes level, CODIS administrator level on that.
I've got a question. On the crime scene submission, we went over this several years ago. And if you have a sample that is taken at a crime scene, and they put it in this instrument, and they get something that hits on CODIS, and no other sample that's sent to an approved laboratory gets that, is this saying that analysis run by a police officer or whoever's doing it is admissible, and there's no other sample that can be rerun by the defense or by anybody else?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's probably gonna be a disaster in certain respects, but I agree this is moving forward. I agree the booking station makes sense. Crime scene part, I think is going to have a lot of challenges.
So the instruction, I think, to rapid DNA instrument operators is that they're supposed to take 2 swabs. The best swab goes to the lab, and what goes through the instrument is supposed to be a second swab. The challenge with that, of course, is that since we don't have magic DNA glasses where we can really see where it is, especially on samples that aren't going to alert to an alternative light source or any of the things that we use to screen samples that might have biological fluid. That is always going to be people doing the best they can. And it is actually one of the reasons why the rapid DNA folks need to be trained and proficiency tested and all of that, because there are clear instructions about how it's supposed to be done. I think we'll see what happens. But one of the barriers before, if you recall, Peter was here before us a few years ago saying that the rapid instrument that Andy had put, the vendor was Andy, at HPD, they used it and they exhausted a crime scene sample on a home invasion. And then that left the lab with nothing to work with, despite the fact that they had a full profile from the Andy instrument, but because the FBI at the time said, sorry, stops where you are, it's not coming up into CODIS because we're not allowing that yet. Basically, there was nothing left to be done with that evidence, is my understanding. Did I get that right, Peter?
Yeah, other than there were multiple items that had been exhausted, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it was a lot of stuff that they had run through the instrument. And so then it left, really the prosecution of that case was put in peril because of those actions. Now, at the time, we had written sort of a letter saying, don't do that. And there was also concerns about the way that they were interfacing with sexual assault survivors whose kids they were taking, and the fact that they lost a couple of them en route to where they were sending them out of state and they got lost. So there were concerns then, serious concerns. I think over time, the FBI has been working on this and trying to create a framework where a lot of these quality issues will be resolved within that partnership with the accredited labs so that those concerns have been mitigated. If you let it go to CODIS, then there's no longer that barrier that we saw with the HPD situation. So that's how I would describe that.
I have a question.
I don't know if you have anything else to add, Peter?
We have a question.
A question, oh, sorry. Yes, Dr. Downing.
Right, so has there been discussions then about limits of when it'll be applied? For example, I can conceive a future, like if a law enforcement agency is approved to use this, would they want to, for example, when they first encounter a sexual assault victim, want to take DNA right away before they bring them for an exam? Like, are there going to be any discussions about something like that scenario?
I'm not sure the answer to that question. I think we're gonna have to look at what the QAS revisions that allow this say. I don't know the answer sitting here. I bet we could find out the answer though, and I can get that to you, Dr. Downing.
I'm not sure anybody knows the answers at the moment. I think this is what I'd really encourage this working group. At least here in Texas, we have the opportunity to wrap guidance requirements around this that other states are going to. But this working group is, I would suggest, very important to work out myriad ideas and concepts like this that I don't think any of us have answers to yet.
I think that having this working group is critical because you got to get your hands around this before it takes off a direction, and then you can't really pull back or cases are lost or whatever bad outcome you can think of could certainly happen. So I think there's getting a strong working outline of what's done is important to do in this.
I think after that,
We can't hear you, Jim.
sorry, here we go. After that, whatever the working group comes up with, the push out for police agencies and prosecutors are going to be super important to know what those do. Because I can feel a level of freak out happening for prosecutors right now where people who normally are not involved in DNA in any way, shape, or form are now going to be handled. So push out for procedures is going to be super important from this agency or whatever agency is tasked with that.
Will there be an opportunity to invite this working group to give updates at the commission meetings moving forward as a standing agenda item?
Yes, we can add that to the agenda.
I would also think that in addition to the organizations that were identified for the working group, there are probably a good number of commissioners that would want to participate in the working group meetings as well. For example, Dr. Downing, because of the sexual assault issues, and because it goes beyond licensing, clearly there are going to be some training issues as well. So I would certainly like to participate moving forward in the working group.
Great, okay, we can have however many commissioners want to participate. I assume somebody from the CHI will want to participate. I don't know if you both need to, but you can figure that out. So we'll add then Dr. Downing, Dr. Kerrigan, and a to be determined representative from the CHI. Is that okay?
And we discussed yesterday, I think, you wanted one name from TACLA, correct? I mean, this is going to be a big group. I mean, I'm sure there are multiple that are very interested, but I get the scale of things, so. we'll
It's
get
up
you.
to you. I mean, I think the commission would be fine with, well, I don't know, you all say, but I mean, what do you think? I guess is my question. What would the TACLA want? Because I'm trying to be mindful of the fact that it's a fair amount of risk shifting to the labs that previously you didn't have, because there were these clear lines between where they, where the work of investigators stop and the work of the scientists begins.
I'd not to, make decisions on the fly standing at a podium, but I think it might be good to have a couple of folks, at least that are representative of various scales and organizations of labs, because it's gonna be something different for different scale labs. You're already gonna have DPS in there, because, you've got CODIS aspects, you're gonna have to have them in there anyways. But a couple of the different scale, different organizations of labs might be helpful.
I think it would be good to have the participation of one of the labs that has been there with Rapid, so Plano or Houston. And Plano and Houston,
I mean, that's not bad right there, Plano and Houston, because
Right.
you've got two very different scale organizations and different ways to put together. So, I mean,
So yeah, why don't we go with, if it's okay with the commission, I think 2 would be great, and then the other advantage of that is if one can't attend, at least there's always someone there.
Right, would you make a similar recommendation for TAC plan in the sense of having an alternate? From my personal perspective, you're gonna want somebody with quality management in every conversation.
Yes, I think I have no objections, it's up to you.
I think, at least initially, having a broader scope.
Yeah.
I think there are gonna be so many people wanting to jump in and have comments on this that at some point, it'll be narrowed, it needs to be narrowed down and some very kind of hard guidelines, hard directives will need to be brought out, because we know that people will take off in directions that will then lead to a lot of problems. So I think, at least initially, this is a good thing. Broader is probably better, and then narrow the scope down.
Okay, so then to repeat, we have two from TACLID, 2 from TAPQUAM, 1 from TCDLA, 1 from TDCAA, 1 from the Licensing Advisory Committee, 1 from ANAB, 1 from A2LA, 1 from the Rangers, 1 from the Police Chiefs, 1 from the Sheriff's Association, Doctors Kerrigan, Downing, and either Ms. Emack or Dr. Cope. And if more people need to get added, we can always do that later.
I can see there being
We can't hear you, Jarvis, I'm sorry.
alright, there we go, it works, it's working stuff. I can see adding possibly a large versus rural prosecutor component, because those are gonna be 2 different things that we're working on. So Dallas and Plano will be totally different than, say, Tyler County or somewhere out in East Route.
So 2 TDCAA, then we have to make it, do we have to make
You don't have
it
to do it right now, I'm just saying it later on in the future, but
2 defense attorneys then? Because my experience with having defense attorneys on these sorts of things is that it's great until they have to be in court, and then it's a real struggle if we're meeting on a day if you have someone with a very active schedule, they can't always be there, so at least then you'd have an alternate for the defense as well. Okay, we're gonna have a big group, but it'll be all right, we'll work it
So
out.
for starters, and then it probably will need to be narrowed down when hard decisions are made. But I think you need a lot of input to start out with.
It is a big change, it's a very big project, and
All right, is there a motion to direct the staff to establish a statewide working group for the purpose of recommending criteria for rapid DNA licensing program?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. So next is item number 12.
So I'll keep this very brief. The items that I wanted to mention to you all are that we did have the meeting of the National Association of Forensic Science Boards in Albany. That was a day and a half or 2 days long, and Ms. Zemak and Dr. Kerrigan were there, and it was a great meeting because we talked about all the different forms of commissions and boards. Lee presented, I presented, there were panel discussions, and it went really well. And the observation I would make about it is, unlike just last year at the same time where it was all about Texas and New York because we were the ones with the most active boards and commissions. So they were heavily relying on us on the substance. This time, it was lots of other states that were focused on: Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, Illinois. Not, because I really tried to help them steer the agenda away from Texas because we're often, the only ones that they look to. And although I don't mind that, obviously we want to highlight our work. There is quite a bit going on in other states, so it was very interesting to hear about that and to learn about that. I was invited to go to the ANAP Assessor Development course that happened in San Antonio just last week. It was a great meeting. They asked me to present to the lead assessors, and I talked to them about how we ended up with this idea of the Texas checklist of items, and they were very honest about their initial impressions of the checklist items, which was like, well, everybody knows this. I don't know why you're doing this. And then they realized in discussions that everybody may know some part of this, but we're actually not all on the same page about things like, what does it mean to prepare for trial? How much time do I get if I leave a lab and go to another one to prepare for trial, and all those sorts of things. So they actually said, the assessors who have done it have said, now we really can see why those items were so important, and they appreciated having the background about the Cologne case, which is sort of what led to those items. So it wasn't just coming to them kind of out of the blue. Tons and tons of positive feedback from those assessors about the work that's going on in Texas. It was really a great meeting, and I'm so grateful that they invited us, and also that we had time to connect about rapid DNA, because the webinar had just happened and they're still trying to figure out how this is all going to work. And so are we. So it opened up lots of dialogue around that subject. We also had a meeting earlier in the week at the Chai in Fort Worth with Jared Kennedy, who the commission is contracted with again to do a lot of DNA training. We have an upcoming training that we're planning on activity. People should mark their calendars for March 27th and 28th. The Texas Rangers training facility in Waco has been just such a great place for us to hold these. We're really grateful to the Rangers for being so generous with allowing us to use that space. And Waco's a good spot because it's central, and also the per diem rates for hotels are much more reasonable there than they are, say, in Dallas or in Austin or other big cities. So Waco is upcoming for, and we're going to talk about activity. We're going to have a panel with lawyers and judges is what we're planning. It's really exciting stuff that we're planning for that. And then we'll do another one on interpretation, and then a virtual training on validation at some point in the future. So those are upcoming projects that will be coming out soon in the area of training and development education. Did I miss anything, Lee, or is that it? Oh, we have the Academy coming up in a couple of weeks. Lee is giving a talk on the use of technologies like the Commission's database and Dr. Barnard's favorite, the portal, to
Should be interesting.
now she's not doing the portal part, DPS is the Kevin Callahan, who is in charge of the portal rollout, is doing that. So Lee and Kevin are going to co-present on that. I'm talking about the Armstrong report and activity level stuff, as well as the firearms report and the method performance data, and I'm co-presenting that with Henry Swafford and Steve Luntz. So I think it will be good. We're excited to go to Baltimore, which is where the conference is this year. I also met with Alex Comsudi, who is the head of the CCA's training grant. As you know, Judge Hervey has retired. Judge Newell has taken over the administration of that grant, and he appears to be very excited to do more collaborations with the commission in the forensic space. So we're going to work with the grantees like TCDLA, TDCAA, the Texas Center for the Judiciary on some of those programs. So that is everything I have in that corner. Yeah. Oh, sure. Did you have a question, Charles?
I did.
Your mic's on.
I literally just hit it. Okay, there we go. With Judge Newell retiring in a couple of years, do we know who's going to be taking over after that?
I don't know that. I don't know. But he'll be doing it at least for as long as he's on the CCA. Dr. Barnard asked me to mention, which we should have actually mentioned earlier in the agenda under administrative, that our offices have been moved. We're no longer in the Stephen F. Austin building. We're in temporary space in William B. Travis, which is just next door this way. We're in temporary space that should probably take about 18 months. We'll be in that space, and the Facilities Commission is renovating a section of the floor for us, and TEA is also on that floor, and CPRIT, which is the Cancer Research Institute. They're renovating the whole floor as part of a big sort of older building renovation project that TFC is in charge of. At some point, we'll have new offices and we'll invite you all there. Right now, what we have is not invitation worthy. I'll just say it like that. But we'll be, as that goes, we'll give you updates.
All right, item number 13, Dr. Stout.
I know I'm on borrowed time, so I'll be quick. All right, TACLAD. We had a fairly quick meeting yesterday. Couple of things to point out. One, we are now up to 80 members in TACLAD, and that includes 25 voting members. So we've managed to incorporate a lot of new agencies into TACLAD in the last couple of years, which is great. So I think that helps with some of these outreach efforts with communicating with laboratories when we have discussions like rapid DNA. We've got much broader reach into much more agencies. Two things that we carried away out of our kind of typical covering of what's going to go on here. We'll work the OSAC stuff. I'm going to go work with NIST to try and arrange some training for laboratories around NIST resources and things like that for labs. So we'll be working at trying to incentivize, inspire, and otherwise cajole more OSAC adoption and getting on there. And then another one, work with Dana about moving some more of that information and some of the specific examples that you had in Austin out, because I know there's a lot of labs that'd be really interested in what y'all learned. So other than that, I think that, oh yes, legislative session. Yeah, what everybody really wants me up here about. So far, I've got about a dozen bills that I'm tracking. The only one that will really have impacts for laboratories right now is SB 3, which has not been filed. And we've not gotten what the language is in that one. Conceptually, that is the one that may ban THC. It is one that is in the Lieutenant Governor's top 25. It's one of those low number, high priority bills. It's going to be a ride to see what happens with it. There is no shortage of conversation and thought process about what will be, what won't be, who's in support, who's not in support. So I don't know, but that is the bill that looks to do that. The other bill that has had some conversation is HB 1422, which is Lacey Hull, representative out of Houston. Conceptually, that bill is structured to try and create a mechanism for sexual assault kits in which the victim does not want to file charges, that there's a mechanism that kit could get tested. I had a meeting on Monday with Representative Paul's office, and we've discussed through that there are some challenges in the bill and the way it's worded. It doesn't really work with CODIS rules, and it doesn't really work with reporting requirements. They, I think, acknowledge that there's some work to be done there. They were aware of Colorado passed a very similar circumstance to this in 2021, so they are up and running with a thing like this. There's a lot to learn out of how Colorado has structured the bill, and folks out of Colorado have given me a mountain of stuff about how theirs is put together and the work of it and all the legislative language. So I think there's an opportunity to work with Representative Paul's office to get to a bill that would work. Now whether it'll actually pass out the other end, we'll see, but I think we can get to that. Other than that, just my typical please let me know if you run up on bills that have forensic implications. I just hired a new comms person that I hope can help me with some of this legislative stuff. But it's still, it's easy to miss bills in the snowstorm of bills, and it really picked up. Ledge Council's a bit backlogged because of the House leadership decision-making process. But it's really picking up now, so anything you can to help me find bills is appreciated. And then with
Talk
that,
about the mentorship.
oh, okay, so two things that we have been trying to move forward. One has to do with evidence management, and I think that Senator Huffman's office is working on carrying the language of that, and language sits again at Legislative Council right now, basically trying to make disposition of toxicology blood tubes better. The other is this concept, I talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, of an apprenticeship program working with the two big university programs. Again, Senator Huffman looks to be willing to carry language on that. We've also been talking with Senator Creighton about this. So the idea being, can we find a way to offset some of the cost of training? So basically the state fund, we call it apprenticeship, that seems to be the word that people resonate with. State funds the labor and benefits for a new trainee for a year to 2 years, treat it like a loan or a forgivable loan. If they stay within, they're successful through that apprenticeship, and they stay in one of the public laboratories for 5 years beyond that, forgive the loan. It doesn't cover the entire cost, but it helps offset some of that. And so manage that through one of the university programs, but really the person is in the laboratory, the practitioner laboratory, as much as possible to really train them on the stuff that we need them to be pragmatically trained on. So there seems to be support on that. We'll see. I'm modestly encouraged, and also mentioned that there seems to be support for additional resources in the next biennium for laboratories in complying with the portal. So I think there may be a couple of things where there might be some support for labs out of this session, but we're, let's see, 15 days into the new session, so we got 130 something left. There's a lot to go yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 14, agenda items, I guess we probably ought to, as we've already talked about, the rapid DNA as being kind of a repetitive item just to go through.
I think we should get a portal update from DPS. Can you add that to the agenda? An official update on where the portal is.
Yes. Agreed.
So that Dr. Bernard can ask the question.
Yeah, torture them. All right, any other items anybody feels needs to be included for the next meeting? All right, item 15, schedule, is there a motion to direct the staff to schedule the meetings for April 11th? I don't see a July one listed.
July 25th?
July, not in mine.
It's on
July
the
25th,
agenda.
October 24th, and then January 30th of 2026. Is there a motion?
I'll make
A second.
I-
All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Number 16, is there public comment by anyone? Somebody listed? Apparently not. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.